we're going to talk about this LG thing. Okay, so um, LG, LG, one of my favorite smartphone manufacturers. If you've watched the channel, you'll know that the V series phones are some of my favorites, if not my favorites overall. And I've just always really loved what they bring to the table on the V series. If you're not familiar, we got Mauricio watching right now on his V60. If you're not familiar with the V series, started out with the V10. It was kind of a weird looking phone. It had a plastic back that came off, and you could replace the batteries. It had stainless steel rails down the side, and it was just an incredibly chunky phone. It had this little screen on the top that was a little ticker kind of thing that you could see your music playing and all your notifications and stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of been folded into Android in general since that time. But the V10 was super cool. But the big thing about the V series phones, if you're not familiar, is that the V series phones had a headphone jack. Now, I'm pointing at you with a twist tie because I feel like I need to emphasize that it had a headphone jack. And that headphone jack wasn't just a headphone jack. It had like a special quad DAC inside, and the amp was a little bit more special than the headphone jacks that were in the phones of the time. And then there was the V20 came out, and it also had a replaceable replaceable battery, and V30, V35, V40, V50, V60. All of them changed slightly. They became a little bit more mundane looking after a bit of time, which was fine, I guess. LG wanted to fit in with the crowd, and the sort of rounded edge slab phone is the way that the industry went. But all along, the V series phones, they kept that quad DAC, right? The quad DAC to me is the most important aspect of the V series. But that's not to say that the V series phones themselves were not beastly phones in their own right. They always had the latest processor. They always had upgraded specs. I think the V series phones were the first phone to have triple lenses on the back of the phone. I think that was the V30 or 40. I can't remember exactly which. And this past year with the V60, they came out with this dual screen case. So you stuck the V60 in the case, and it folded out to be like two separate screens of the same size. The V series, the G series, Danny is right. G series has the quad DAC. I think at least on the last two iterations, it got the quad DAC. I don't think it initially did have it though. I think the first few years it was special to the V series. But when when Apple took the headphone jack, when they finally mustered up the courage to take the headphone jack away from the iPhone, which was in 2017, I believe, that was the iPhone 7. The V series, I mean, it's like it almost feels like the clock started ticking on the V series, like, and right away, because within a year, most of the major manufacturers had either ditched their headphone jacks or planned to ditch their headphone jacks. And so I think the last year Samsung had a headphone jack was the Note 10 and S10 line. Correct me if I'm wrong out there, Chad, but I believe that was the last time that the Samsung series had any kind of headphone jack. But let's be clear. The headphone jacks on the Samsung phones sounded good. They were good sounding headphone jacks, but they were off the shelf parts. They were not anything special. You could go to any parts supplier, get that headphone jack, put it in your phone, right? And so the V series, I don't understand LG. I just don't, because LG had this unicorn of a phone, and with each passing year, it became more and more of a unicorn, in the sense that, like, the V60, I think the only thing that you could really like knock it for was that it didn't have 120 hertz, and it wasn't a quad HD screen. but it was an OLED screen. LG makes great OLED panels, as anybody who's watched an LG OLED TV knows. But it had the Snapdragon 865, I believe it was. Yeah, the 865. It had all the latest bells and whistles. It had 8 GB of RAM, which some people think is not enough. But nobody bought it, and nobody bought the V50, and nobody. I just don't understand. Now, there are plenty of people out there in the world who are huge fans of audio, right? And audio is best experienced through that 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, and a good source. And the V series provided that. And so it's been kind of a bummer to watch LG sort of put that phone out and never go to the target audience and say, "Hey, are you an audiophile or a hi-fi enthusiast or whatever you want to call yourself? This is the only phone on the market that you can get that can drive your special fancy headphones that you paid more than the phone costs for. This is the only phone." And so you buy this phone. They never did that. I don't understand why. And now, over the past few weeks, LG has there have been rumblings that LG might be getting out of the smartphone game. Something and they've lost so much money year over year over year over year in the smartphone game. Although they are still the fourth largest seller of smartphones in the United States, they just kept losing money. They put out these flagship phones that competed both in specs but also in price with the other phones. They did knock down the price of the V60 this past year and offered a lot of value for, I think, an extra $100. You get the dual screen case. But the writing was already on the wall. I mean, the writing has been on the wall maybe for LG since the G5. If you're not familiar with the G5, it came out the same year as the V10. And I guess there were boot loop issues with the software that would basically brick the phone, and that sort of dried up a lot of goodwill with the customers. And then LG has done what they could to try and get the customers back. They give a 2-year manufacturer's warranty, where everybody else gets one from other manufacturers. But I don't even know. I mean, I know LG has a marketing department because I have interacted with people from LG's marketing department. But how they've advertised these phones, how they've tried to break into the U.S. flagship market, they do very well in the U.S. Like mid-range and lower end phone market. But the thing is, like, I guess that's just not doing it. They had a deal. Well, rumor was they were working on a deal with a Vietnamese company, and the Vietnamese company, now it sounds like that whole deal is not going to happen. They had a they were going to buy the North American business from LG, and now I guess they're not. And then today, the big news today was that LG's successor to the V60, which a lot of people are calling the V70, LG's internal name for it was Rainbow. I don't know why they would call the phone Rainbow, but that was their internal name for it. So they had this phone, and it was just about to be field tested. And then the news comes down. It says that, let me see, what is the verbiage here? We've got LG's V60 successor put on hold. This is an article from GSM Arena, but I've seen this in a bunch of other places. So this is a report that comes from the Korean outlet Chosun, and basically they were going to put the Rainbow out there for field testing, and now they have postponed the testing and release of that phone for in an indefinite amount of time. And when you're talking, like, we're in March now, so we're coming up to the end of Q1, quarter number 1 of the financial year. This is when phone companies start ramping up for spring, summer, so they're bringing their phones out, and the V series phones usually come out in that springtime window. So I'm afraid, people. I'm afraid that LG is um I'm afraid that LG is done. I'm afraid it's like stick a fork in them. They are done. Speaking of sticking a fork in it, Danny says he's having steak frites this evening for dinner, as they say over there in the France. Uh, and this really bums me out, and it bums me out on multiple levels. Um, LG, while they might not have been, a very staunch competitor for the Apples and the Samsungs of the smartphone world, LG was at least a major, like, worldwide corporation in the market, spending time and money, uh, at least staying in the game. So this just shows more of what I think we've been afraid of all along, which is that the smartphone wars are over. They have been over. I made a video 2 years ago saying the smartphone wars are over, and, um, and, I think at the end of the day, like, we kind of lost, because once we lose any kind of uniqueness with like the V series, if once we lose any kind of thing that's special or unique or different, or a company that might do something that would push the other companies to do something interesting. I mean, now it's basically down to Samsung and Apple, and that might not be the case in the rest of the world, but in the North American market, we're we're um we're down to Samsung and Apple.